The air around the grave was unusually still, as if even the wind held its breath out of respect for the sorrow unfolding there. Rain hadn't fallen in hours, but the ground remained damp, soaked not just from the earlier storm, but from grief itself. A man in his late 50s knelt quietly before a modest marble gravestone, one hand pressed against the stone as if trying to hold on to something long lost. His suit, though expensive, clung to his form as if it, too, had been abandoned by time and comfort. His shoulders trembled in silence, not from the chill in the air, but from something far colder, regret. "Are you crying, because you loved her, or because you forgot us?" The voice pierced the silence like a scalpel to skin. He turned abruptly, startled, not by the presence of another, but by the familiarity of the voice. It came from a teenager, standing a few feet away. Her posture was confident but guarded, her eyes locked on him with a fury she struggled to contain. She looked to be around 16. Tall. Striking. With eyes that mirrored a past he thought had been buried along with the woman beneath the earth. For a moment, his breath caught. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, stunned. "I'm sorry, who are you?" he asked, barely managing the words. The girl stepped forward slowly, as if each footfall cracked a layer of the ground he stood on. She reached into the worn backpack slung over one shoulder and pulled out a photograph. Her hand shook only slightly as she held it up. "This was taken 19 years ago. You left before the next one could be taken." He took the photograph with trembling fingers. It was faded, curled at the edges, but there was no mistaking it. A woman with soft eyes, glowing cheeks, and beside her, a younger version of himself. His arm wrapped around her shoulder. Her stomach round with the child that now stood before him. A choked sound escaped his lips. He staggered back, as if the photograph itself had struck him. The air around him thickened with something unseen, truth. She didn't wait for him to speak. Instead, she crouched beside the grave, brushing some loose leaves away from the name engraved on the stone. Her mother's name. His ex-wife. The woman he once promised to love forever, until fear and pride swallowed every vow. She used to say you'd come back. Even when she was too tired to keep her eyes open. Even when I stopped asking. She still believed. He wanted to say something. Anything. But his voice refused him. His mind raced backwards through time, through offices and boardrooms, through contracts and mergers, through excuses. Through silence. And then, the guilt. Thick, bitter, unrelenting. It pressed on his chest, made it hard to breathe. She looked up at him again. There were no tears in her eyes. Only questions. "Why did you leave?" He opened his mouth again, but before the words could come, the cemetery around them seemed to dissolve. Time reversed, folding in on itself like the pages of a story being read backward. The present faded, and in its place bloomed a memory, sharp, vivid, almost cruel in its clarity. 19 years ago, the apartment had been small but filled with light. His then-wife laughed easily back then, the kind of laugh that turned heads in a crowded room. She was radiant. Pregnant. And he was terrified. Terrified of being a father, of the weight of responsibility, of the idea that life would no longer belong entirely to him. He had always lived for ambition. The corner office. The six-figure deals. The kind of legacy carved into skylines. And yet, in the face of something truly eternal, a child, he had run. No explanation. Just a note and silence. The memory shifted. She sat alone on the edge of the bed, holding the note in one hand and her swollen belly with the other. The sun streamed in, but her world was going dark. That was the beginning of her silence. She never tried to find him. Never begged. Instead, she raised their daughter alone. She worked nights cleaning offices, mornings taking care of the baby. Her hands, once soft from painting, grew calloused. But her eyes never lost their light. especially not when looking at her child. That child, the teenager who now stood before him in the present, had grown up without ever knowing what it felt like to be held by her father. To have someone call her "my girl" and mean it. All she had were stories. Stories that faded each year her mother grew weaker. And then, the day came when her mother didn't wake up. Back in the present, the man collapsed onto the bench beside the grave. He buried his face in his hands, the photograph now crumpled between his fingers. "I didn't know," he whispered, voice cracking. "You didn't want to know," she replied. Her tone was steady, not cruel. Just true. "You built empires. You bought silence. But you never looked back." She stood. Adjusted her backpack. "I didn't come here to ruin your peace. I just wanted to see what kind of man stands at a grave pretending to mourn." He looked up at her then. Really looked. And saw not just his ex-wife in her features, but pieces of himself. The way her brow furrowed. The stubborn set of her chin. The fire in her gaze. "What's your name?" he asked, barely above a whisper. She paused at that. Studied him. Then, finally, spoke. "I go by Maya. But her name for me was Miracle. Because she said I was the only good thing you ever left behind." She turned, walked away slowly. The wind picked up again, just enough to rustle the leaves around the grave. He watched her disappear down the path, his heart beating to a rhythm he no longer recognized. The story was not over. It had just turned its first page, in reverse. 16 years earlier, before the grave and the girl, before the heartbreak and regret, Nicholas Vance was a man who measured life in quarterly earnings and corporate victories. His world was sharp suits, boardrooms echoing with his voice, and endless rows of glass buildings reflecting the sky he never had time to look at. He wasn't cruel. He just didn't have space in his life for softness. Not even for the woman he once vowed to love. Her name was Emily. She was the kind of woman who brought light into rooms without trying. A painter who preferred the quiet of sunlit studios to the noise of the world Nicholas thrived in. They met when Nicholas was still building his empire, still believing he could have it all, ambition and love, success and serenity. For a while, it worked. Or at least he thought it did. Emily was patient. She believed in him, stood by him when the company was just an idea scribbled on cocktail napkins and whispered dreams over midnight coffee. But dreams have a price. And Nicholas paid for his with time, time he never gave her, time he promised and never kept. By the time Emily told him she was pregnant, something in her had already begun to wither. He remembered the moment not because of the joy it should have brought, but because of the silence that followed. She stood in the doorway of their penthouse, hands trembling slightly, a nervous smile on her lips. And Nicholas, staring down at a glowing screen filled with numbers, looked up just long enough to nod. "That's great," he said, his voice flat, already half lost in another deal, another pitch. Emily didn't cry. She never did, not in front of him. But that night, he came home late to a cold apartment and a letter on the kitchen counter. No accusations. No bitterness. Just a note that read, *, you don't have to choose. I already did, *. He searched for her. Or at least he convinced himself he did. Hired a private investigator who returned with only silence. No forwarding address, no calls, no messages. For years, Nicholas carried on, convincing himself she had left because she was weak, or selfish, or both. He told himself it was better this way, clean, decisive, surgical. But sometimes, in the stillness between power plays and presentations, he thought of her. Wondered if the child was born. Wondered if it had her eyes, her laugh. Wondered what it meant to abandon something before you even met it. The world praised him. Forbes called him a visionary. Investors hung on his every word. But his nights were quiet. His mornings began without goodbyes. And though his phone never stopped ringing, it never once lit up with the name he wanted to see. Emily. He could have stopped it. Could have chosen differently. But by the time realization crept into his conscience, it was too late. His pride, his empire, had already become the walls of his prison. Years turned into decades. Faces changed, buildings rose, and Nicholas aged. The mirror reflected less of the man he once was and more of the regrets he pretended not to have. The only constants were the ghost of a love he let slip away and the phantom child he never knew. Then came the accident. It was a headline, a footnote in the local paper. Emily Voss, 44, artist and community advocate, dies in single-vehicle collision on Oak Ridge Highway. He read the line 100 times, each word slicing deeper than the last. He hadn't heard her name in over a decade. And suddenly, there it was, final, irrevocable, cold. Nicholas didn't cry. Not then. Not even when he stood alone at the edge of the cemetery 2 days later, a black umbrella shielding him from the drizzle, a bouquet of lilies in his hand. He thought he was alone. Thought no one had followed her life, let alone her death. But someone else was there. A girl. Maybe 16. Lean, pale, soaked to the bone. Her hair plastered to her cheeks, her hands clenched into fists. She looked at him not with curiosity, but accusation. You knew her. Nicholas flinched. Her voice was low, but sharp. I did, he said. It was the truth, but it felt insufficient. The girl stepped forward. Something in the way she moved was eerily familiar. He noticed the curve of her jaw, the tilt of her eyebrows. Features he hadn't seen in years. Features he once kissed goodnight. Then why weren't you there? The question landed like a punch. He stared at her, silence flooding the space between them. And then, she pulled something from her pocket. A photograph. Wrinkled, faded, well-loved. It was Emily. Holding a baby. Her smile serene, tired, proud. She said you left, the girl whispered. That you had your reasons. But she never stopped loving you. Nicholas reached for the photo, but she pulled it back. You don't get to have this now. And then, softer, I think you're my father. Everything stopped. The wind. The rain. His breath. His heart. For a moment, the world hung suspended in that single sentence. And just like that, everything Nicholas thought he knew began to unravel. The room was dim, lit only by the muted flicker of a street lamp bleeding through the heavy curtains. Outside, the city pulsed with 1,000 lights, unaware of the quiet life that had once bloomed and broken in the small apartment on the 3rd floor. Anna sat on the edge of the twin bed, fingers curled around the frayed ends of a baby blanket she refused to throw away. It had been 19 years since she'd last seen him, Michael Lancaster, the man who had once loved her with the fire of 1,000 promises and left her cold with the silence of a closed door. She had never told anyone the full truth. The night she left his penthouse wasn't a dramatic farewell. No tears, no fights. Just a quiet decision made while he slept, his hand still resting on her waist. She had already known. The way he started taking longer calls, the way his eyes flickered with conflict when she spoke of the future. When she told him about the baby, his silence confirmed it all. And so, Anna left, taking nothing but her pride and a beating heart. She had Ethan a month before her 21st birthday. They moved into a shelter for single mothers, then a cramped basement suite under a kind widow's house. Anna worked at a bakery during the day, cleaned offices at night, and juggled the world in between for the boy who had his father's eyes and his mother's stubbornness. She told Ethan stories about stars and skyscrapers, about kings and kindness, about love that sometimes hurt but still taught you something. She never mentioned his father. But that didn't mean she forgot him. Michael was in every feature of Ethan's face, in the tilt of his head when he laughed, in the way he clenched his fists when he got angry. Every year, on Ethan's birthday, Anna would sit with a pen and write a letter addressed to Michael. She never mailed them. Just folded them carefully and placed them inside an old shoebox beneath her bed. One letter for every candle Ethan had blown. At school, Ethan always said his father was gone for work. And maybe that wasn't entirely a lie. Because Michael Lancaster hadn't just walked away from them, he had walked away from a version of himself he wasn't ready to face. Anna understood that now. Painfully. Patiently. Still, every year on the same day, Anna would bring Ethan to the park across from Lancaster Tower. They'd sit on a bench, eating ice cream, watching the suits move like chess pieces in and out of the building. And Ethan, never suspecting, would say, "I think I'm gonna work in a place like that someday, Mom." And Anna, always smiling too tightly, would nod and say, "You just might." One year, when Ethan was 7, he drew a picture of his future family for school. 2 figures, a boy and a woman. The father was missing. "Why didn't you draw your dad, honey?" the teacher asked. Ethan looked up and said, "I don't know him. But Mom says he used to love me before I was born." Anna cried that night. But silently. Because there was no space for grief in the world she had built. Only forward. Only more shifts. More savings. More plans for Ethan to have what she never did. And yet, some nights, when the apartment was quiet and the city outside hummed with things that had nothing to do with her, she'd wonder. Did Michael ever think of them? Did he remember her laugh? The way she used to trace letters on his palm when he couldn't sleep? Did he feel the ache in his chest at 3 in the morning, not knowing why? One day, when Ethan turned 18, he came home with an envelope. His face was unreadable. Anna knew that expression. It was Michael's expression. Controlled. Cold on the surface, but storming underneath. "Mom," he said, placing the envelope on the table. "Why is my birth certificate missing a father's name?" She froze. She had waited 19 years for this moment, and still she was not ready. Her throat tightened. "Ethan. I found this." He opened his backpack and pulled out one of her letters. The one she wrote on his 12th birthday. The one that began with, "Michael, he's learning to ride a bike now. You would have laughed seeing him fall and curse like you used to." He placed it down gently. "Michael. That's him, isn't it?" Anna nodded, slow, eyes brimming. "Yes." He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just asked, "Where is he?" She hesitated. Then answered, "He still lives in the city. I see his name sometimes. On buildings. On magazine covers. And he doesn't know about me." Anna looked away. He chose not to. Ethan left that night. Said he needed time. She didn't stop him. He was a man now. And Michael Lancaster, his father, was about to discover the kind of man he had unknowingly raised. 3 days later, Anna sat by the window, holding her phone with shaking hands. She had called him once. Just once. Left a message. "If someone comes looking for you, please listen. This time, just listen." And that's how it all began to circle back. To the grave. To the rain. To the boy who walked into a cemetery and asked a stranger a question that split the world into before and after. "Did you love my mother?" And Michael, standing drenched and broken before the tombstone of the woman he once knew but never truly understood, turned to see a boy, no, a mirror of himself. He had no words. Only silence. And the echo of 19 years collapsing like dominoes in the wind. The morning fog hung low over the narrow street where Ava lived, her breath visible in the chill air as she buttoned up her worn coat and gently nudged open the creaky door of their small apartment. Inside, her mother stirred from the couch, where she had fallen asleep waiting for Ava to return from the late shift. The smell of coffee filled the room, thin but comforting, and Ava poured 2 cups from the old pot, placing one beside the couch with a quiet smile. Her mother opened her eyes, and for a moment, there was a flicker of the woman she used to be, strong, determined, fiercely protective. But the years had taken their toll. The struggle to raise Ava alone, the pain of abandonment, and the weight of secrets unspoken had worn her thin. "You didn't have to wait up," Ava said softly. "I always do," her mother replied, her voice husky with age and memory. "Even when you were little. Especially then." There was a quiet pause, filled only by the soft clink of spoon against ceramic. Ava sat beside her, fingers wrapped around the warm mug. She had grown up in the shadow of unanswered questions. Her mother never spoke of her father. Never even hinted at a name. But there were moments, slips in conversation, the way her eyes would mist over at certain songs, or how she'd freeze when flipping through old photo albums. Ava had learned not to ask, but that didn't mean she hadn't wondered. Especially as she got older. Especially when she looked in the mirror and saw a face that didn't quite match the woman who had raised her. She reached into the drawer beneath the coffee table and pulled out a small envelope, the edges worn from being handled too often. Her mother stiffened. "You found it again," she whispered. Ava nodded. "You left it in the same place. I think maybe you wanted me to." Her mother didn't speak. Just stared at the envelope, as if it might catch fire and burn away everything they'd built. Inside was a single photograph. A man in a sharp suit, laughing at something off camera. His eyes crinkled in the corners, his hand reaching for someone just out of frame. "Is this him?" Ava asked. She had asked before. The answer had always been silence. This time, her mother nodded. Slowly. Reluctantly. "His name is Daniel. Daniel Whitaker." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Ava waited, but no more came. Her mother looked out the window, as if trying to rewind the years to when she had last seen that man. And maybe, in her mind, she did. "He never knew," her mother finally said, her voice trembling. "I didn't tell him. We were too different. I didn't want to be the reason he gave up everything." Ava's breath caught. "But I was his child. Doesn't that mean something?" Her mother looked at her then, really looked. "It means everything. That's why I did what I did. Because I wanted you to grow up free. Without expectations. Without pain." Ava didn't know how to respond. The rage and sorrow that had simmered quietly beneath her skin for years had no outlet. She wanted to scream. She wanted to hold her mother and never let go. Instead, she asked, "Where is he now?" Her mother hesitated. "I don't know. I stopped following after he got remarried. He stayed in the city, I think. The last I heard, he was a partner at a law firm. Successful. Important." Ava folded the photograph carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Her mind spun with questions she couldn't form yet. But the seed had been planted, and no amount of caution could keep it from growing. She needed to know more. The next few days passed in a haze of routine and reflection. Ava worked her shifts, helped her mother, and late at night, when the apartment was quiet, she researched. Daniel Whitaker. The name was not uncommon, but paired with law firm and the city, it narrowed quickly. She found him in a firm bio, distinguished, smiling, older now but unmistakably the man in the photograph. There was a short video interview embedded in the site. She clicked. His voice. Calm, confident. He spoke about justice, legacy, and the importance of giving back. She watched, transfixed. She felt like a stranger peering into a life that should have included her. Should have been hers, somehow. One evening, she stood outside his office building, the envelope clutched tightly in her pocket. She didn't go in. Just watched. Waited. When he emerged, tall and composed, coat buttoned neatly, her breath caught. He walked past her without a glance, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely invisible. Back home, she sat with her mother again. This time, the silence between them was heavier. "Do you regret it?" Ava asked. Her mother was quiet a long time. Then she whispered, "Only when I see you hurt." Ava wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. "I want to meet him. Not to destroy anything. Just to know." Her mother nodded slowly. "You deserve that." It was a few days later when she saw the obituary. Not Daniel's. His wife's. A woman named Elaine. The funeral would be held at a cemetery not far from where Ava lived. She didn't plan to go. She just found herself there. And that was when it happened. She stood quietly near the edge of the crowd, uncertain. Then, she saw him. Daniel. Alone. Shoulders hunched slightly, grief etched into the lines of his face. He stepped away from the others, walking toward a stone bench beside the grave. Her feet moved before her mind could stop them. He was seated, hands folded, staring into nothing when she approached. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared he might hear it. She stood before him, and when he looked up, she asked the question that had haunted her for years. "Do you remember a woman named Clara? Clara Mayfield?" His eyes widened. She had a daughter," Ava continued. Her voice was barely a whisper. "She never told you, but she had a daughter." Daniel stared at her, stunned. Then his gaze drifted over her face, searching for something. Recognition. Connection. The truth. And when he saw it, whatever it was he needed to see, he froze. "God," he whispered. "Is it you?" And Ava, who had spent her whole life wondering who she was, felt something in her chest shift, melt, and settle. She nodded. "Yes," she said. "It's me." The conference room buzzed with hushed voices and soft footsteps on polished marble floors. Robert sat at the end of the long mahogany table, his eyes fixed on the glowing presentation screen, though he hadn't absorbed a single word in the past 10 minutes. His mind was trapped in the memory of that afternoon at the cemetery, the voice of the girl still echoing in his head, "Why were you crying at my mother's grave?" The meeting adjourned with polite applause. Executives stood, shaking hands and gathering folders. Robert remained seated. It wasn't until his assistant approached that he stirred. "Mr. Garrison, the young woman you met yesterday? She's here. She said you told her to come by." He blinked. "What?" "She's in the lobby. Would you like me to send her away?" Robert shook his head slowly. "No. No, send her in." Moments later, the glass door opened, and the girl stepped in. She wasn't timid this time. Her walk was deliberate. Her eyes were steady. Her presence pulled the air out of the room. He gestured toward the chair across from him. She sat down without hesitation. "You asked me to come," she said. "So here I am." He cleared his throat. "You said something yesterday. About your mother. About me." Her gaze did not waver. "My name is Claire. Claire Adams. My mother was Elizabeth Adams. She died 2 weeks ago." He felt the floor tip beneath him. "Elizabeth. She told me stories," Claire continued. "She told me she once loved a man who didn't love her back the same way. Who left when she needed him the most. Who didn't know she was pregnant." His throat tightened. "I never knew," he whispered. Claire nodded. "I believe you. But that doesn't change the fact that I grew up wondering why he never came." He lowered his gaze, shame rushing in like a tide. "Why now? Why come to me now?" "Because you were crying," she said. "You didn't know she was gone, and yet you cried like you just lost her yesterday. That told me more than a DNA test ever could." Robert swallowed hard. Did Elizabeth ever try to find me?" She did, Claire said. But she never wanted to force herself into your life. She knew you had dreams. A company. Ambitions. He gave a bitter laugh. And what do those things mean now? Claire was silent. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes pleading. Why did she leave without saying goodbye? Without giving me a chance to do the right thing? Claire looked at him for a long time. Because she thought you'd already made your choice. The words hit harder than any slap. He looked away. I want to know you, Claire said quietly. I didn't come for money. I didn't come for some inheritance. I just want to know who you are. And why you left. He nodded slowly. Then let me tell you. They sat for over an hour. He told her about his childhood, his fear of becoming his father, the pressure of building an empire from nothing. How he ran when things got too real. How he convinced himself that Elizabeth was better off without him. Claire listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally blinking back tears. When he finished, he said, "Would you like to meet someone?" She tilted her head. My mother. Your grandmother. Claire's eyes widened. She's alive. Yes, he said. And she would love to meet you. They left the office together. Downstairs, the car waited. Claire sat beside him in the back seat, her silence no longer cold but contemplative. As the city rolled past outside, she finally spoke. Do you regret it? He didn't pretend to misunderstand. Every single day. She looked at him, her face softening. Then maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is the start. For the first time in years, Robert felt something warm in his chest. Not relief. Not absolution. Hope. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. And the car drove on, into the city's golden hour, where new chapters often begin in the quietest ways. He was usually composed, a man whose very presence commanded rooms, silenced meetings, and dictated deals worth millions. But as she stepped into his office that morning, something shifted. Michael Lancaster felt a tension he hadn't known in years. She was just a caterer, the assistant to the event team that had managed last night's gala. That's what the file said. But her eyes, those eyes, held a storm he couldn't name. He motioned to the seat across from him, trying to ignore the pulse echoing behind his ribs. She sat down slowly, fingers clasped tight over a small notebook. He noticed the red thread on her wrist again, the same one from the gala. And suddenly, it wasn't just familiar. It was haunting. So, Miss Carla, is it? You came highly recommended for future collaborations. I thought we'd start with a small in-house event. Something elegant. Quiet, he said, his voice cool, his gaze unreadable. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, sir. I'd be honored. But her hands betrayed her. They trembled. Ever so slightly. He offered her a bottle of water from across the table, their hands brushing. Just a second. Just enough for her to freeze. And for him to feel it too. He leaned back, trying to shake it off. Do you believe in déjà vu, Miss Carla? She hesitated. Then looked up. Directly at him. I believe, the soul remembers what the mind forgets. The air between them thickened. He didn't know why that sentence felt like it was spoken to an older version of him, a forgotten version. But it did. Later that day, Michael paced the length of his office. He couldn't concentrate. Every glance at her file, every polite answer she'd given, it all felt scripted. Like a version of truth built to keep something else buried. He glanced at the screensaver on his desktop. A photo of a cabin in the rain. He remembered a night long ago. A storm. A bakery. And a girl with soaked hair and trembling lips offering him shelter and silence when he had nothing but chaos inside. He dismissed the thought and returned to work. But something kept clawing at him. When Carla left that evening, she paused outside the door. He caught her reflection in the glass as he reviewed contracts. Her eyes lingered on his nameplate longer than necessary. She mouthed something. A name. Or maybe a prayer. And then she left. That night, he opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a single photograph, creased and faded. A woman standing under a bakery awning, holding a tray of cupcakes, looking directly at the camera. There was rain on her lashes, and fire in her smile. The red thread had been on her wrist even then. He closed the drawer quickly, as if it had burned him. He didn't want to admit the possibility. He didn't want to hope. But a crack had formed. And it would not stay closed. The next morning, she returned with sample menus and small talk. He tried to remain detached, analytical. But when he casually asked, "Ever worked at Nightshade Bakery?" her reaction shattered the pretense. She dropped the menu. Her knees almost buckled. And when she looked at him, her expression was no longer guarded. "Yes," she said. Quiet. Steady. Defiant. His voice came out low. "That was 6 years ago, right? The big flood. I remember the street. I got stranded that night. Someone helped me. Gave me warm bread and silence. I never even asked her name." She nodded slowly. "You left before morning. But you left your cufflink behind. I kept it. I thought maybe you'd come back for it." Michael's breath caught. His face turned pale. He reached into his pocket and retrieved the twin to that cufflink. Still carried with him after all these years. Matching designs. Same initials. They sat in silence for what felt like eternity. The red thread on her wrist had not faded. It had frayed. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally whispered. Carla looked down. "Because the man I met that night was kind. Human. And when I saw your name again, I wasn't sure he still existed." She rose to leave. "I'll make sure the event next week is perfect, Mr. Lancaster. Don't worry. You won't have to see me again after that." But he stood too. "No. Please. I want to talk. Really talk. I think we have more to remember than just a rainy night." She paused at the door. Her voice trembled. "Do you really think memories are enough?" He stepped forward. For the first time in years, unsure. Vulnerable. "I think they're the only honest place to start." Outside, the sky darkened. A storm was brewing again. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. The echo of her voice, the way her eyes had glossed over with unspoken words, and the way she had touched the edge of her bracelet, all of it lingered like smoke he couldn't wave away. He sat in his penthouse, city lights blinking outside like indifferent stars, and poured himself another glass of whiskey. He hadn't touched the drink. It just sat there, as if waiting for him to confront something deeper than liquor ever could dull. His assistant had left a file on his desk earlier that evening. A standard portfolio for the new small business grant applicants. Normally, he would delegate this to someone else, but something about the name caught his attention. Anna L. Miles, founder, Little Lantern Bakery. He froze. Miles. That name scratched a corner of his memory he didn't even know was there. His fingers, suddenly cold, opened the folder. Inside were photographs. One of a small, sunlit bakery with pale yellow walls and a window box overflowing with violets. Another showed a woman in a simple apron, flour on her cheek, smiling at a little boy who held a cupcake like it was treasure. But it wasn't the bakery or the child that stopped Michael's breath. It was her. She looked different. Older, thinner perhaps. But her eyes were the same, deep, kind, and carrying something ancient. Regret. Hope. Pain. He stared at the photo so long, he forgot the city around him. And then he whispered out loud, as if the room needed to hear it, "Anna." In a locked drawer in his office, he kept a keepsake box, one he hadn't opened in over a decade. His hands shook as he fumbled the key into the lock. Inside was a folded napkin from a corner cafe, a dried violet petal, and a tiny bracelet made of red string, barely big enough for a wrist as thin as a twig. He had tied it around her wrist the night she cried in the rain, swearing he'd remember her, even if everything else disappeared. He stood suddenly. He had to know. It couldn't be coincidence. He pulled up the bakery's website. There it was again, Anna Miles, single mother, small business dreamer. And below, a tagline, "Little lanterns light the way home." The phrase struck him like lightning. She had said those exact words once, just before their brief world collapsed. "If we ever get lost, little lanterns will lead us back." He left his apartment, barely registering the elevator ride down or the doorman's greeting. He needed to see the bakery. To see her. Maybe it was too late. Maybe she would slam the door in his face. But he couldn't sleep until he knew. Until he saw. The bakery was closed when he arrived, the lights dimmed and the street silent. But someone was still inside. A woman sat at a small table by the window, hunched over papers and sipping tea from a cracked mug. Her hair was longer now, and her movement slower. But it was her. He didn't knock. He couldn't. He just stood there, staring through the glass, heart pounding like it was trying to escape his chest. Inside, Anna looked up. For a moment, she didn't move. Her hand paused mid-air, holding a pen. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. She stood slowly, the chair scraping quietly across the floor. Their eyes locked across the divide of the window. And then she turned off the light. Michael staggered back, stung. But it was fair. He had walked out of her life without explanation. He had buried her in memory, even though she had burned like a lighthouse through every storm he'd faced. He returned the next morning, but the bakery was bustling with customers and laughter. He waited outside, leaning against his car, until he saw her emerge with a tray of pastries. She paused when she saw him, expression unreadable. "May I talk to you?" he asked, voice low. She didn't answer at first. Then she handed the tray to someone else and stepped down to him. "Make it quick." He swallowed. "That boy in the photo. Is he mine?" Her breath caught, just barely. But she recovered quickly. "It took you long enough." He blinked. "So he is?" She didn't say yes. She didn't need to. He closed his eyes. A wave of nausea, regret, and awe hit him all at once. "Why didn't you tell me? You walked away, Michael. You erased me like I was an inconvenience. I begged you to stay, remember? And you said you had no space for complications." The words stabbed like glass. I thought it was just a one-night thing. That you'd be better off without me. You thought," she said bitterly, "for both of us." He didn't try to argue. There was no defense. "Can I see him?" he asked softly. "He thinks his father is a hero who died overseas. That's the story I gave him because I couldn't stand to say his father didn't care enough to stay." Michael looked away, pain flooding every corner of his being. "You deserve to hate me," he murmured. "I don't hate you," she replied, voice trembling. "But I can't let you come back and destroy what I've built. He's happy. He's safe." He nodded. "I won't force anything. I want to fix what I broke." She studied him for a long time. Then, finally, she said, "Come back tomorrow. Not to see me. To see him. I'll tell him you're an old friend. If you mess this up, Michael, it will break more than just my heart." And with that, she walked back inside, leaving him frozen on the pavement, clinging to the first thread of redemption he hadn't dared dream he could grasp. Michael didn't sleep that night. The image of the red string on her wrist burned into his memory like a scar resurfacing after years of denial. It wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. He paced his apartment, flipping through old files, photos, and letters he hadn't touched in years, trying to find something, anything, that could confirm what his heart already feared. At 2 a.m., he found it. Tucked between the pages of an old business journal was a photograph. A woman standing in the rain under a neon bakery sign, her hand lifted, waving to the camera. The string on her wrist glowed like blood under the flash. His hands trembled as he traced the shape of her smile. It was her. It had always been her. By morning, he had his assistant track down every detail of her employment. She had listed her address as a small apartment complex on the edge of the city. He didn't hesitate. When he arrived, she was already gone. The landlady looked at him with tired eyes and handed him an envelope. She said if anyone ever came looking, to give them this. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. Michael. I never meant for you to find out like this. I thought I could stay hidden, that I could protect him from the world we once shared. I never hated you. I just didn't want him to grow up thinking he wasn't enough. I told him you were a traveler, a man who loved the stars too much to stay in one place. He believed it. Until the questions came. And I didn't have the answers. He deserves more than myths. So if you're reading this, and if your heart still remembers anything real between us, find him. Not for me. For him. Michael sank into the apartment's dusty steps, the paper clutched in his hands like scripture. He couldn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up somewhere between the photograph and the memory of a bakery that no longer existed. He looked up, the city skyline blurred in the distance. There was one place left to go. The cemetery. When he arrived, it was quiet. The trees whispered above, their branches swaying gently under the morning sun. And then he saw them. Her. Standing by a grave. And beside her, a boy. No older than 8. Brown hair. Sharp jawline. Eyes that mirrored his own like a cruel reflection in time. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The boy turned, curious, and tugged at his mother's sleeve. Is that the man in the picture? She froze. The breath left her lungs. She turned slowly. And when their eyes met, it was like the sky stopped moving. Michael stepped forward, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes. His voice was hoarse. You told him about me? He asked, she replied softly. I didn't show him the photo. He found it. Under my pillow. Michael lowered himself to one knee, facing the boy now. Do you know who I am? The boy looked between his mother and the man in the expensive coat. Then, without hesitation, he nodded. You're my dad. Michael's heart stopped. He looked up at her, eyes wide, filled with everything he never said, everything he should have fought for. You should hate me, he whispered. I did, she replied, her voice trembling. But hate fades. What stays is the question that haunts you when the room is quiet. Would he have stayed if I asked? Michael reached out his hand to the boy. Can I sit with you? Just for a moment. The boy nodded. They sat together on the stone bench beside the grave, the silence thick with everything words could never explain. She stood apart, watching the man who once shattered her now sitting quietly beside their son, showing him a photo from a wallet worn with years. That was me when I was your age, Michael said, pointing. My dad took it. He used to tell me that one day, I'd be a better father than he ever was. I didn't believe him. Until now. The boy didn't say much. Just looked at the photo, then up at Michael, and finally, smiled. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. When they stood to leave, Michael hesitated. "Where are you going now?" he asked her. She shrugged. "Wherever he feels safe." Michael nodded. "Can I walk with you? Just for today?" She didn't answer. Just looked at the boy, who took both their hands and began walking. They left the cemetery like that, 3 shadows under the morning sun. Not as a family. Not yet. But as something new. Something fragile. Something worth saving. Michael sat alone in his penthouse, the lights dimmed to a faint glow, casting long shadows across the pristine marble floor. The glass of whiskey in his hand remained untouched. Outside, the city shimmered in gold and silver, a distant world that no longer seemed to belong to him. His suit jacket lay crumpled on the couch, and his tie had been carelessly discarded on the floor. But none of it mattered. Not the view, not the wealth, not even the empire he had built brick by brick. All he could hear was her voice repeating in his head, over and over, like an echo from a world he had forgotten how to reach. "He's your son, Michael." It was not just a revelation. It was a reckoning. The years he had buried under meetings, mergers, and meaningless affairs had all led to this moment, standing at the edge of a truth he never dared to imagine. His son. Ethan. A name he had never known, attached to a child who bore his eyes. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the DNA report she had left on his desk. The scientific precision of the percentages meant little next to the photograph of the boy. Ethan's innocent smile, the missing front tooth, the slightly crooked bangs. Michael had stared at the picture for hours, finding pieces of himself in every line and curve of the child's face. He didn't need the report. His heart had already confirmed what science only measured. "I wasn't ready to be a father," he whispered into the silence, "but that doesn't mean I didn't deserve the chance." His voice cracked. He hadn't cried since his mother died. But now, the tears came slowly, as if they had been waiting for permission. He remembered the day he told her to leave. The words weren't said out of cruelty but out of fear. Fear of vulnerability, of losing control, of loving too much. She had stood at the door, her eyes swollen from pleading, her hands shaking as she clutched her stomach. "If you walk out now, don't expect me to come running after you," he had said. And she hadn't. Not then. Not for 19 years. She had disappeared into the world and built a life for their son without him. A life of quiet resilience, invisible strength, and immeasurable sacrifice. He stood abruptly, knocking over the glass. The whiskey pooled on the floor, spreading slowly like regret. He didn't flinch. He walked over to the bookshelf and pulled down a leather-bound journal. It was old, the corners bent, the spine barely holding. Inside were clippings, notes, and a single photograph, her, smiling under the rain, taken on the night he first kissed her. He had kept it all. He traced the outline of her face with his finger. "I failed you," he whispered. "But I won't fail him." His phone buzzed. It was his assistant. "Sir, the team is waiting for you in the boardroom." He looked at the clock. 10 a.m. The quarterly report meeting. The one he had prepared for all week. He almost laughed. None of it mattered anymore. "Cancel it," he said flatly. "Sir." "Cancel the meeting. Indefinitely. And book me a flight. I need to find someone." "Yes, sir." "May I ask?" "No." He hung up and began packing. He didn't know where to start. He didn't know where she had gone. But he had to try. He opened the drawer where she had left the envelope. Beneath it, almost unnoticed, was a small note scribbled in hurried handwriting. "You once said if I ever needed you, I should leave a sign. I hope this is enough." The note was unsigned, but he knew who had written it. And he knew what she meant. The next morning, he drove across the city, retracing every place she might have gone. The diner where they had their first date. The community center where she once volunteered. Even the small bookstore where they used to spend rainy afternoons. Nothing. On the fourth day, he visited the bakery where she had once worked. The owner, an elderly woman with soft eyes and flour-streaked hands, recognized her immediately. "She left last week," the woman said. "Said she needed to go somewhere quieter. Somewhere her boy could grow up without all the noise." "Did she say where?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. "She mentioned a small town. Willow Creek. Said it was peaceful. No one knew her there." Willow Creek. Michael had never heard of it. But it didn't matter. He left that afternoon. The drive was long, winding through forests and fields that stretched for miles. The city disappeared in the rearview mirror, replaced by a landscape that felt like memory. He arrived as the sun began to dip, casting golden rays through the trees. The town was small, quiet. A single main street lined with flower shops, cafes, and a tiny school. He parked and walked, unsure where to begin. But his feet seemed to know. He stopped in front of a modest white house with peeling paint and a swing hanging from the porch. A child's laughter rang through the yard. He moved closer. And then he saw him. Ethan was playing with a paper airplane, running in circles, his cheeks flushed with joy. Michael's breath caught. A woman stepped onto the porch. Her eyes met his. For a moment, time stopped. Then she stepped down slowly, her expression unreadable. "I didn't think you'd come," she said softly. "I wasn't sure you'd want me to," he replied. She looked away. "He's happy here. He doesn't know about you." "I didn't know how to tell him." Michael nodded. "I don't expect anything. I just want a chance to be near him. To know him. And if I say no, I'll still stay. Even if from a distance. I just want to be the man he can be proud of someday." Her eyes softened. She looked back at Ethan, who was now trying to balance the airplane on his head. "Start with hello," she whispered. Michael stepped forward, slowly, like approaching a sacred altar. Ethan looked up, curious. "Hi there," Michael said, kneeling. "I'm Michael." The boy tilted his head. "Hi. I'm Ethan. Do you know my mom?" Michael smiled, a tear escaping. "Yeah. I knew her a long time ago." The boy grinned. "She's the best." Michael's voice broke. "Yeah. She really is." He looked up at her. She nodded once, barely perceptible, but enough. And in that small, quiet moment, something broken began to mend. Michael stood silently at the edge of the park, the late afternoon sun casting a golden hue across the small playground where a boy was laughing. It wasn't the sound that caught him, it was the tilt of the boy's head, the way he squinted into the light, and the unmistakable outline of a red thread bracelet wrapped loosely around his small wrist. His chest tightened. He had followed every vague tip, every whisper of her name across towns and cities, but nothing prepared him for this, seeing his son before seeing her again. The boy ran toward a woman sitting on a bench under a maple tree, a book open in her lap, her dark hair swept back like he remembered. She looked up briefly, smiling, not seeing him. He stood there, motionless, afraid to move forward and yet unable to walk away. He wanted to believe it was fate, not coincidence, that led him here, like the universe had waited for him to be ready. Not rich, not powerful. Just, ready. For truth. For family. For love. The boy tripped, landing on his hands and knees. Michael moved before thinking, rushing forward. "Hey there, little man," he said gently, kneeling and helping him up. The child looked at him with wide, curious eyes. "You're really tall," he said with a grin, brushing dirt from his knees. Then, he squinted again. "Your eyes, they look like mine." Michael's throat closed. He forced a smile, choking back the flood rising inside him. "Do they?" The woman was walking toward them now, each step hesitant, her body stiff as though it remembered too much. When she got close enough to see his face, she froze. The air between them trembled. He rose to his feet, slowly, hands at his sides, vulnerable. I didn't know what to say to you if I ever found you again. I had all these speeches in my head, but none of them feel right now. She looked at her son, then back to him. You don't have to say anything. He's healthy. He's kind. And he asks about you, every night. Michael nodded, voice raw. I thought I was childless. I lived like it. Cold. Detached. I thought that was strength. But it was emptiness. I just didn't realize until too late. She stepped closer, eyes glassy but steady. It's not too late. It almost was. But we're here now. And if you're here for real, not just out of guilt or grief, then maybe it was meant to be. He knelt again and looked at the boy. Hey, do you like chocolate ice cream? The boy lit up. It's my favorite. Michael looked up at her, eyes shimmering. I'd like to take him for ice cream. If that's okay. If I can earn my place in his world. She studied him, his posture, his tone, his eyes. Not the man she once knew. Not the man she once loved. But maybe, someone better. Someone forged by loss and longing. She gave a small nod. Okay. But I'm coming too. He smiled, a real one, for the first time in years. I was hoping you would. They walked together toward the sidewalk, one step behind the boy who skipped ahead, humming to himself, red thread bracelet bouncing with every step. Michael glanced sideways at her. He's amazing, he whispered. So are you, she said. You just forgot for a while. He reached for her hand, tentative, not assuming, but she took his, fingers interlocking like they once did, long ago, on a night neither of them had forgotten. Behind them, the sun began to set, draping the sky in soft fire. And though no promises were made, no apologies recited, a new chapter had begun, quietly, gently, like a sunrise creeping in after a long storm. Some stories don't end with grand gestures. Some end like this, three hands held tight, walking forward, together, into the light.